Warning! Tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, back for final fabrication, and then we're going to start some of the wiring, get the tag strips installed, and maybe even get the power supply wired up in this segment. This is a big brother to an earlier project, which was this little 6BM8 amp. And this little guy puts out a couple of watts. Sounds really good. Have it hooked up to some efficient little clip speakers with a powered sub in my downstairs room, and it sounds awesome. But I'm hoping this will have at least twice the power, and as you can see, it's not much bigger footprint. I'm also hoping that with these larger output transformers, this one will have a little more bass. This one definitely needs a powered sub to really sound good. And maybe this one will power a little bit bigger speakers and just be a little nicer, higher end product. So anyway, let's get on with finishing up the fab work and wiring this thing up. Okay, so been kind of playing around with different placement of the tubes, and I think this is going to work really well like this. I think it looks nice. Again, they're not perfectly centered, but they're laid out where they're practical, and they also look nice. And I'm going to use these little gold trim rings around the tubes. And so I came in and measured everything. There's what I came up with. It's 73 millimeters from the edge, it's 140 to the next tube, and 37 from the front edge. So that allows me to put the sockets on the inside and make sure everything's going to work good in that respect. So let me flip this over and put the tube sockets on the inside in this place, make sure this is where we're going to put them, and then we're going to mark the top and punch these holes and get the tube sockets in place. And that's the majority of the fabrication work will be done. So I went ahead and connected these output transformer to the speaker jack wires, and like you see, I pulled them in from the side, so it gave us plenty of room left in this little area instead of like looping them out and in like that. So both of these are hooked up. Here's where the tube sockets are going to sit, and let me spin it around so you get a better view of what this is going to look like and why this is going to be ideal. Okay, one of the things I look at when I'm deciding where to put the tube sockets is I like using these hold down screws to hold my tag strips so we don't have any extra hardware on top of the amplifier. So as you can see, I can put one right there, then I can put another one right there, and then if I want to, I can put one right there and right there. So I have options of putting a bunch of tag strips on there. And the other thing is the heater can then run like over and up, because we're planning on putting a tag strip here, and on this side it's going to be the virtual center tap for the heater wires. And then the other one can come down, over, and up to this heater. The most sensitive wire is the grid of the input triode, and I believe it's pin 2. So it can come up here to this tag strip, and then these signal wires can go around like this and be away from the heater wires. Also, the cathodes of both of the elements of this tube are on this side of the tube socket, so they can come up here, and then we can put our cathode resistors and caps over here on this tag strip to keep the heat away from like this front edge of the amp, which hopefully we may not even need to have a tag strip here in the front, but if we do, it's no big deal. We can always add one, and that just made sense to lay it out like that. As you can see, we have plenty of room here. We got room over here to put all of our caps, and we can keep the AC over here away from the tube and the signal. So I think that looks like a closest we're going to get to perfection on where to mount the tubes. And so I'm going to go ahead and mark these and get my chassis punch and punch those holes for the tube sockets and get ready to start building this thing. Okay, so now we're ready to punch these holes for the tube sockets, and these Compactron ones are about a 1 inch. They're slightly bigger than that, and I'm using these ceramic China ones that, while they're not the most great quality in the world, the spacing here on these lugs or these tabs is wide enough for me to be able to use my little decorative rings to attach them to the chassis. I got some new old stock American made ones, but this width here is too narrow, and I'd have to just have screws holding it down, and this is kind of where I'm going for form over function. These will work okay, and it'll look better. So when we go to punch these holes out, again, there's several ways to do this. One of them is something like this, a step drill set. And this big one here will go large enough, and especially if you're doing an aluminum chassis that's not real thick, they'll probably work fine. I prefer using these Greenlee punches, and it's a little device that looks like this. This little head that gets pulled through the die is got teeth on it like that, 2 prongs, and when you tighten this bolt, it pulls it through this die and punches the hole. If you're going to use these, I highly recommend getting one of these pull bolts that has this thrust washer roller bearing kind of thing on it. It makes it a lot easier to turn and eliminates the friction between the bolt and this die. So how these work: first you want to get a piece of printer paper, double it over, punch the die through like that, and then stick it through the hole. Then you go on the underside like this, and screw down the part on the inside. You can pull this through either way, but it's easier if you put this bolt on the top rather than trying to turn it with it on the inside. And then you simply turn this bolt. Might be easier to use like a ratchet and a little extension if you had one, but this is what I've got on hand. It's just this crescent wrench. And you just turn, and when you get close to the end, you feel it getting a little easier to pull, and then you'll hear a couple of clicks. And there's the second one. Then you pull that through, and there's our nice, super clean hole. Now these are slightly larger than 1 inch, and that won't quite fit. And so we're going to take this half-round bastard file. I don't know why they call it that, but that might be an interesting thing to look up. But it's the right curvature to come in here, and it's actually, as you can see, it's the perfect curvature. So I'm going to come in here and open this up a little bit till this socket will just fit in. And I'm going to go ahead and punch both these holes and fit them, and then come back and show you how to mark these holes to get these to mount and have the tube ring sit in there perfectly to attach it from the top side so there's no hardware showing. Okay, so we got these holes punched. We used our file, opened them up just a breath, bevel the edges a little bit, and now our little sockets fit in here perfectly. So what I use to attach these to the top plate of the chassis are these little tube rings, and I'll put the link below to this store, Yoda Electronics, that I've actually bought quite a few tubes. I bought a bunch of these rings. They've got really nice volume knobs that match this same kind of champagne color. They also have them in black and silver if you would rather use those. The nice thing about these is you don't have screw heads showing on the top of your chassis. And hopefully I'm going to be able to use these bolts that are holding down these transformers for my other tag strips, and then use these little decorative rings that'll sit like that, and you won't see any screw heads on the top or the front of the chassis. And I don't think either on the sides either. There'll be some on the back, but that's fine. So what we do at this point is we decide which way we're going to orient the tube sockets, whether they're going to be like that or that. We've decided they're going to be front to back like that. And so we come in here and we get our caliper and measure the centers of these two holes, and I'm getting 39 millimeters. So then we come over here and try to center up as close as we can. 39 millimeters. Let me make a little mark, and then we'll come back and double check with the tube socket that these are 180 degrees apart from each other, and they're very close. So then I use my punch here, and it looks like they're going to be just dead center on these sockets. Mark one hole. We come back and mark this other one. We may have to come back and, slightly slot these out a little bit. And I usually drill the hole a little oversized. That was off a little bit. Just to give me a little wiggle room to adjust the ring a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and drill these holes, mark this other socket, bolt these sockets down, and show you what that looks like all final assembled. And there we go. Got our tube sockets mounted with our cool little tube rings, and you can see they're centered up in the holes. There's a little bit of adjustment if I have to tweak them a little bit, but I think that looks awesome. And then you don't have any visible hardware on the top of the chassis, and it dresses it up and makes it look a little more professional. The volume knob we have is the same champagne gold color, so that'll all match. And there we go. And I know some people hate these blue transformers. I don't know. I've just kind of gotten used to them, I guess. May come back at some point and paint them. I did paint all the screws and the little washers black because I can't stand having that silver hardware, and I think they look much better painted black. So now we've got all of our holes drilled, we've got our tube sockets mounted, we can flip the amp over and start figuring out where we're going to put tag strips. I'm going to go ahead and mount the choke in the back of the chassis, get it all squared away, and we can start wiring this thing up. Okay, we got the primary wiring done to the power transformer, and we also got this choke installed. Got this hole drilled over here. We're using the other hole on the IEC socket to hold the other side of the choke in place. That turned out great. So let me show you how I wired up this IEC socket. Down here we have a ground lug that's connected to the chassis with the paint scraped off. Got a wire that runs over here to the ground terminal of the IEC socket. The white wire from the primary of the power transformer is connected to this non-fused wire. The black wire twisted around this white wire comes up. It's twisted around this yellow wire, comes up here to the power switch. And then the yellow wire comes back from the power switch and is hooked up to the fused side of the IEC connector. And so now we have the primary of the transformer all wired up. So these are the two wires from the choke that can be run over here to our tag strips. And then these are the high voltage secondary wires that will also hook up to this tag strip over on this side. Now one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm actually going out of my way to make the AC power supply and all the noise as compact as possible and put it all over on this side of the amp, kind of drawing this is the line that we're not going to go past. And it makes it a little more difficult. This chassis is actually really small for the size of this amp and the components we're using. So this is one of the harder parts of wiring this up. And I feel like once we get the power supply all done, then we've got all this room over here to do the rest of the wiring. And I think it's going to be a lot easier. So let me show you how I prep these tag strips that we're going to be using for the power supply. So this is the first tag strip, and this is a 5-terminal with the ground lug on one end, and this is going to attach to one of the bolts that's holding the power transformer down with the paint ground off the chassis. So this is going to be our star ground point. As you can see, I've put a jumper wire from this terminal to this terminal to this terminal. So these three are all going to be ground points. You can see we have this arched over with some insulation on it to make sure we don't touch this terminal, because this is going to be a high voltage positive terminal, as is this one. We're actually going to pull the 2 high voltage secondary wires up to this point through diodes, and that's going to be where our DC B plus starts and goes through this first cap, which is a 33 UF. Then one wire from the choke is going to hook up to this. It's going to go over to the choke, and it's going to come back and connect to this terminal right here, which is then filtered through this 100 UF cap on this end of the tag strip, and it's grounded here. This capacitor is grounded here, and we're connecting everything to these lower holes while we have this tag strip out of the chassis to give us room to attach stuff up here once we bolt it in place. So the second tag strip's a lot less complicated. This is a 4-terminal one, started life as a 5, and I cut this end off. And so we have positive. This is going to be a ground that's connected over to our star ground point. And then these two are going to be used for the 6.3 volt heaters. We'll have a 100 ohm resistor that goes from here to the ground, from here to ground, to create a virtual center tap so that the heaters aren't floating. And this is a technique that I use to help keep the amplifier quiet. So when this is assembled into the amp, it's going to be laid out like this. This is the front of the amp. The power switch sits right here. The IEC connector sits right here. High voltage wires from the secondary are going to come out about right here in the chassis, and then they will go up and over. And like I said, the 2 sides of the transformer will go through diodes that are put in line with the wire to this terminal right here. The center tap of the transformer will be grounded right here on the negative side of this first cap. But remember, this, and this are all grounds. So then one wire of the choke comes over, connects here. The other wire of the choke comes over and connects here. And then we're going to have this 120 ohm resistor that's going to go between this terminal and this terminal. And this is going to be our final B plus connection for the fully filtered DC that then goes over to the plates of the tubes, which is the next step of building this amplifier. So next we're going to bolt these 2 tag strips in place, solder this negative connection here, and then start hooking up the wires from the power transformer and the choke to these terminals, and then put this resistor in place across here, and that'll finalize our power supply and all the filtering, and we'll have our B plus right here, and then we can pull the amp up on a variac and make sure that our voltage here is right. Well, I think we're starting to make good progress on this project, and it's starting to look like an amplifier. I think this looks really cool. You'll see link below where you can buy these little tube rings and these volume knobs. Obviously, you don't have to use these. You could hold it down with screws and nuts. If you use little button head screws, that would look fine too. You can do it however you want. They also make these in silver and black, so you could leave the chassis aluminum and maybe clear coat it, and then put, a black knob and black rings. That might look cool. You can always paint these output transformers too. I know some people don't like these blue ones. It doesn't really bother me. So anyway, Hope you're enjoying this series and the content on my channel. If you are, please subscribe and please like the video. That helps a lot. Also, I'll put a link below to my Patreon page and my website donation page. Any love you can give me there really helps me be able to afford to keep doing these projects and bringing you content. So, until next time, have a nice day.